The silver burned. It always burned. But Arya had learned long ago that screaming only made them tighten the chains. So she stood silent in the center of the great hall, her wrists raw and bleeding where the cursed metal bit into her skin. Her head held high, even as every instinct screamed at her to submit, to bow, to beg for mercy that would never come. The Moonridge pack court surrounded her in a perfect circle, hundreds of eyes gleaming in the torchlight. Some watched with pity. Most watched with cold satisfaction. The weak had no place among wolves, and Arya, small, powerless Omega, had always been the weakest link in the chain. Arya Silvermane. The voice that spoke her name echoed through the vaulted stone ceiling, and despite herself, despite everything, her heart still fractured at the sound of it. You stand accused of bearing the Omega mark in a bloodline of alphas. You stand accused of weakness. You stand accused of bringing shame upon your family name. King Theron Nightshade stood on the raised dais at the far end of the hall, his massive form silhouetted against the eternal flame that burned behind the throne. Even from this distance, Arya could see the gold of his eyes that had once looked at her with warmth, with promise, with something that might have been love. Now they were as cold as the silver that poisoned her blood. How do you answer these charges? Theron's voice was steady, kingly, empty of emotion. Arya's jaw tightened. The silver chains clinked as she shifted her weight, ignoring the searing pain. I answer that I was born as the moon goddess made me. If that is a crime, then your quarrel is with her, not with me. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Bold words from an Omega. Foolish words. Elder Morrigan stepped forward from the council line, her silver hair gleaming like cobwebs in moonlight. Her smile was sharp as a blade, defiant to the end. Your mother would be so disappointed. My mother, Arya said quietly, was murdered by members of this very court. So forgive me if I don't particularly care about their disappointment. The murmur became a growl. Theron raised one hand, and silence fell like a hammer. Enough. The king descended the steps slowly, each footfall deliberating, final. Your mother's death was ruled an accident, Arya. A tragic loss during a hunt. You dishonor her memory with these wild accusations. Wild? Arya laughed, and the sound was bitter as ash. My mother was the strongest hunter in 3 kingdoms. She didn't simply fall from a cliff. She was... Enough! Theron's voice cracked like thunder, and the alpha command in it drove Arya to her knees. She fought it with everything she had, but the Omega in her blood betrayed her, forced her down, forced her to submit. She hated it, hated him, hated herself most of all. Theron stopped 3 feet away from her, so close she could smell the pine and smoke scent of him, the scent that had once meant safety. Now, it only meant pain. You were my friend once, he said, so quietly that only she could hear. I'm sorry it came to this. Arya looked up at him, silver chains pooling around her knees, blood dripping from her wrists onto the ancient stone floor. No, you're not. Something flickered in his golden eyes. Regret? Pain? It didn't matter. It was gone in an instant. Theron reached into his cloak and withdrew a silver collar, intricately carved with runes that seemed to writhe in the torchlight. The collar of severance. Arya's breath caught in her chest. No, she whispered. Theron, please. By the authority granted to me as King of Lycantrops and Alpha of the Moonridge Pack, Theron's voice rang out across the hall. I hereby sever your bond with this pack. You are Omega no more. You are Wolf no more. You are nothing. He knelt before her, and for one wild moment, Arya thought he might relent. But his hands were steady as he clasped the silver collar around her throat. The runes flared bright as stars, and Arya screamed. It felt like her soul was being torn in half. The pack bond, that invisible thread that connected her to every wolf in Moonridge, that had been her constant companion since birth, suddenly snapped. The silence that rushed in to fill the void was deafening, suffocating. She was alone, truly, completely alone. When the light faded, Arya collapsed forward, gasping. Theron caught her before she hit the ground, and for just a moment, she felt his hand tremble against her shoulder. I'm sorry, he breathed against her ear, so soft she might have imagined it. This was the only way to save you. Before she could process those words, he released her and stood, his face once again the cold mask of a king. "Take her to the border. She has until dawn to leave our territory. If she's found here after sunrise, execute her on sight." The guards moved forward, hauling Arya to her feet. She didn't fight them. What was the point? She had nothing left to fight for. As they dragged her toward the massive oak doors, Arya caught one final glimpse of Theron standing before his throne, the eternal flame casting dancing shadows across his face. He looked like a statue, like a stranger, like someone who had never loved her at all. 7 years earlier. "You're doing it wrong." 10-year-old Arya looked up from the bow she was trying to string, her face flushed with frustration. "I am not. You are." 12-year-old Theron dropped down from the tree branch he'd been lounging on, landing with easy grace despite the 15-foot drop. He was already showing signs of the alpha he would become. Tall for his age, broad-shouldered, confident. "Here, let me show you." Arya scowled but handed over the bow. "I don't need your help, princeling." "It's not help. It's a lesson. There's a difference." Theron's grin was infectious as he demonstrated the proper technique, his hands sure and practiced. "See? You have to brace it against your hip, not your stomach. Otherwise you'll never get enough leverage." He handed the bow back, and this time when Arya tried, the string slid into place with a satisfying snap. Her face lit up with triumph. "I did it." "Told you." Theron flopped down onto the grass beside her, hands behind his head, staring up at the patches of blue sky visible through the forest canopy. "You're stubborn, Silvermane. That's going to get you in trouble someday. Better stubborn than arrogant, Nightshade." He laughed, and the sound echoed through the woods. Fair point. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the rustle of leaves and the distant call of a hawk. The training grounds were supposed to be reserved for alpha pups, but Theron had started sneaking Arya in months ago, teaching her everything he learned from the weapons masters. "Theron?" Arya's voice was small. "Do you think I'll ever present as alpha?" The prince turned his head to look at her, his golden eyes serious. "Does it matter? Everyone says omegas are useless. That they're just for—" She hesitated, not quite understanding the whispered conversations she'd overheard. "For breeding, for serving the pack." Theron sat up, his young face fierce. "That's stupid. My mother is an omega, and she's the smartest person in the kingdom. She runs half the council meetings while my father naps on his throne." He reached over and flicked Arya's forehead lightly. "Whatever you present as, you'll be brilliant at it. Because you're Arya Silvermane, and Silvermanes don't know how to be anything less than extraordinary." Arya rubbed her forehead, but she was smiling. "You really believe that?" "I know it." Theron's grin turned mischievous. "Besides, when I'm king, I'm going to need people I can trust. People who are smart and stubborn, and who won't let me get away with being an idiot. That's going to be you, Arya. You're going to stand beside me and help me make Moonridge the greatest kingdom in the territories. Promise?" The word came out softer than she intended. Theron held out his hand, pinky extended in the solemn ritual of childhood oaths. "Promise. You and me, Arya. Always." She hooked her pinky around his, and they shook on it, sealing a vow that felt more real than any ceremony or crown. "Always," she echoed. The memory faded like smoke as the guards shoved Arya through the pack's border gate. She stumbled, caught herself, and kept walking. The silver collar was still locked around her throat, a constant burning reminder of everything she'd lost. The chains had been removed from her wrists, but the wounds remained, weeping silver-tinged blood down her hands. It was nearly midnight. She had until dawn, maybe 6 hours, to get far enough away that the border patrol wouldn't find her. Not that it mattered much. An omega without a pack bond was as good as dead anyway. The rogues would smell her weakness from miles away, and without the protection of pack territory, she'd be easy prey. Arya pushed deeper into the forest, heading instinctively toward the only place that had ever felt like home besides the castle, the Shadow Peak Mountains. Her mother had taken her there every summer before the accident, teaching her the hidden trails and secret valleys that most wolves had forgotten. The night was cold, and Arya's thin ceremonial dress offered little protection against the wind. She should have been freezing. Instead, she felt nothing. The absence of the pack bond had left her hollow, like someone had carved out her insides and left only a shell. She walked for hours, barely aware of the passage of time, until the first hints of dawn began to gray the eastern sky. The forest had given way to rocky foothills, and ahead of her loomed the jagged peaks of Shadow Peak, their snow-capped summits turning pink in the early light. Arya stopped at the edge of a cliff overlooking the valley below. Moonridge was visible in the distance, a sprawl of lights and buildings centered around the castle's tall towers. Her home, her prison, her past. This was the only way to save you. Theron's whispered words echoed in her mind. What did that mean? Save her from what? From the elders? From some threat she didn't understand? Or had it just been empty words, a final cruelty to make her doubt everything? Arya's hand went to the silver collar at her throat. The runes were still warm, still active. She pulled at it experimentally, but it might as well have been welded on. Magic and silver, combined to ensure she could never return to what she'd been. Fine. She didn't want to return anyway. The sun crested the horizon, bathing the mountains in gold, and Arya turned her back on Moonridge forever. She climbed higher into the peaks, following half-remembered trails from her childhood, until the castle was lost from view, and she was alone with only the wind and stone for company. By midday, she reached the Valley of Echoes, a hidden basin between two peaks that her mother had shown her years ago. Ancient ruins dotted the valley floor, remnants of a civilization that had existed long before the Lycantrops claimed these mountains. Her mother had called it a sacred place, though she'd never explained why. Arya stumbled down the rocky slope into the valley, exhaustion finally catching up with her. She'd had no food, no water, and the silver poisoning was making her weak. When she reached the valley floor, she collapsed beside a crumbling stone wall, her vision swimming. This was it, then. This was where her story ended. Rejected, exiled, alone. At least it was a beautiful place to die. She closed her eyes and let the darkness take her. When Arya woke, it was to the sound of wind chimes, except there were no chimes here. She opened her eyes slowly, confused. The sun had set, and the valley was bathed in moonlight, but it was the wrong color. Instead of the usual silver-white, the light was tinged with blue, making everything look strange and dreamlike. Arya pushed herself up on trembling arms and froze. The ruins were glowing. Every stone, every crumbling column, every ancient archway pulsed with soft blue light, and the air itself seemed to hum with energy. The sound she'd mistaken for wind chimes was actually coming from the light, a musical resonance that made her bones vibrate. What? Her voice came out as a croak. Come! Arya spun around, looking for the source of the voice, but there was no one there. Just her and the glowing ruins and the strange blue moonlight. Come to me, daughter of silver. Come and claim what was stolen. The voice wasn't coming from any direction. It was coming from everywhere and nowhere, reverberating in her skull like a second heartbeat. Against every instinct for self-preservation, Arya stood. Her legs were shaky, but they held. She followed the pull of that voice deeper into the ruins, past fallen pillars and eroded statues, until she reached the center of the valley. There stood an altar. It was massive, carved from a single piece of black stone that seemed to absorb rather than reflect the blue light. Symbols covered its surface, not the runes of modern pack magic, but something older, something primal. On top of the altar sat a crown. Arya approached slowly, her heart hammering. The crown was made of what looked like ash, gray and delicate, as if it might crumble at a touch. But when the blue light hit it, veins of silver threaded through the ash began to glow, and Arya realized it wasn't ash at all. It was something else, something alive. You were never meant to be Omega. The voice was clearer now, emanating from the crown itself. Arya stood before the altar, transfixed. What are you? She whispered. I am memory. I am power. I am the truth your kind has forgotten. A pause. I am the Ashen crown, and I have waited centuries for one worthy to claim me. I'm not worthy of anything. I'm just... You are Arya Silvermane, daughter of Thessa Silvermane, granddaughter of the first wolves. Your blood is older than the kingdoms, older than the Alpha and Omega divide. You are not weak, child. You were suppressed. Arya's hand trembled as she reached toward the crown. I don't understand. Touch me, and you will. Every instinct screamed at her to run. This was old magic, Dangerous magic, the kind that could destroy as easily as it could save. But what did she have left to lose? Her pack was gone. Her bond was severed. She was already dead in every way that mattered. Arya's fingers brushed the crown. The world exploded into light and memory. She saw the beginning, the first wolves who walked as both human and beast, who knew no distinction between Alpha and Omega, who drew their power from the earth itself. She saw the schism, when fear and hunger for power led some wolves to bind others, to create the hierarchy that would define their species for generations. She saw her own bloodline, the Silvermanes, who had fought against the binding and paid for it with exile and death. She saw her mother, standing in this very valley, her hands on this very crown, making a choice that would cost her everything. And she saw Theron, bound by silver threads that led back to the elders, his will not his own, forced to hurt the one person he'd sworn to protect. The visions faded, and Arya found herself on her knees before the altar, tears streaming down her face, the crown now resting in her hands. It was warm, pulsing with a heartbeat that matched her own. "Will you accept this burden?" the voice asked. "Will you become what you were meant to be? Not Alpha, not Omega, but Guardian? Will you return to break the chains that bind your people?" Arya looked down at the crown in her hands, then at the silver collar still locked around her throat. Two symbols of bondage, two different paths. She thought of her mother's face, of Theron's whispered apology, of every Omega who had ever been told they were less, were weak, were nothing. "Yes," she said, her voice steady for the first time since her rejection. "I accept." She placed the crown on her head. The silver collar shattered, and Arya Silvermane began to burn. Power flooded through her like liquid fire, rewriting everything she'd ever been. Her Omega nature didn't disappear. It transformed, became something deeper, wilder, unbound by the artificial constraints the schism had created. She felt her wolf rising inside her, but it was no longer the small, submissive creature she'd always known. This wolf was ancient and fierce, with eyes like dying stars, and a howl that could shake mountains. The transformation lasted an eternity and an instant. When it finally ended, Arya stood in the center of the valley, surrounded by a circle of scorched earth. The ruins had stopped glowing, returning to silent stone, but she could still feel the power thrumming beneath the surface, waiting. She looked down at her hands. They were unchanged, still small and scarred, still bleeding from the silver wounds, but she felt different. Stronger, complete in a way she'd never been before. The ashen crown sat light on her head, as if it weighed nothing at all. "You are the guardian now," the voice said, fainter but still present. "The path ahead will be written in fire and blood. The kingdom that cast you out will fear you. The wolves who called you weak will see their mistake. But remember, power is not the goal. Freedom is." Arya turned to face the direction of Moonridge, hidden beyond the mountain peaks. Somewhere in that city, Theron sat on his throne, believing she was dead or dying. Somewhere, the elders who had orchestrated everything congratulated themselves on eliminating another threat. They were all wrong. "I'm not dead," Arya whispered to the wind. "And I'm coming home." The ashen crown pulsed in response, and for the first time since her rejection, Arya smiled. It was not a kind smile. The reports began as whispers, rumors carried by traveling merchants and frightened refugees from the outer territories. A creature in the mountains, they said, something that moved like shadow and struck like lightning, something that hunted those who abused their power. Alpha Garrick of the Ironwood Pack was the first to die. His body was found at the base of a cliff, surrounded by scorched earth and the lingering scent of burning cedar. The official report claimed a fall, but the claw marks on his throat told a different story, as did the message carved into the stone beside him: "Justice finds the unjust." Then came Alpha Helena of Riverbend, discovered in her own throne room with her ceremonial chains melted around her wrists. Beta Marcus of Stonebrook, found in the forest with ash in his lungs and terror frozen on his face. Alpha Dermot of Clearwater, who simply vanished one night, leaving only his silver rings behind, bent and twisted as if crushed by an impossible grip. All of them had one thing in common: a history of cruelty toward the Omegas and their packs. King Theron Nightshade stood at the window of his private chamber, staring out at the Shadow Peak Mountains in the distance. The reports were spread across his desk behind him, each one more disturbing than the last. 7 alphas dead or missing in 3 months. The outer packs were terrified. The elders were demanding action, and Theron couldn't shake the feeling that somehow, impossibly, this was connected to her. "Your Majesty?" Theron turned to find Captain Roran standing in the doorway, his expression grim. "What is it?" "There's been another incident." Alpha Cornelius of Wolfsbane. Roran stepped into the room, closing the door behind him. "He's alive, but barely. His guards found him in the forest, unconscious. He claims he was attacked by a wolf with eyes like dying stars." Theron's hand tightened on the window frame. "Did he identify his attacker?" "That's the strange part, sire. He says it was a female. Small in stature, but impossibly strong. She wore—" Roran hesitated. "He says she wore a crown made of ash and silver." The blood drained from Theron's face. "That's impossible. I thought so too, but there's more." Roran pulled a folded cloth from his pocket and unwrapped it carefully. Inside was a fragment of gray material, shot through with veins of silver that seemed to pulse with inner light. This was found at the scene. The healers can't identify what it is, but it radiates power unlike anything they've ever felt. Theron took the fragment, and the moment his fingers touched it, he felt a jolt of recognition so strong it nearly brought him to his knees. He knew this power. He'd felt it once before, years ago, in a hidden valley where ancient ruins slept. The Valley of Echoes, where he'd sent Arya to die. "Assemble the council," Theron said quietly. "Now." "Sire, it's nearly midnight." "Now, Captain." Roran bowed and left quickly. Theron turned back to the window, the fragment of crown clutched in his fist. The mountains stared back at him, dark and full of secrets. This was the only way to save you. He'd meant those words when he whispered them during her exile. The elders had given him a choice: perform the rejection ceremony and exile Arya, or watch them execute her for the crime of carrying dangerous bloodlines. He'd chosen exile, hoping she would run far away and never look back. He'd never imagined she would find the crown. A commotion in the hallway pulled him from his thoughts. Theron opened his door to find guards running toward the throne room, their faces pale with shock. "What's happening?" he demanded. "The vault, Your Majesty!" one of the guards gasped. "The royal vault has been breached!" Theron's blood turned to ice. He ran. The vault was located in the lowest level of the castle, protected by 3 feet of solid stone, blood magic wards, and guards who rotated every 6 hours. It had never been breached in the 500 years since its construction. Until tonight. Theron burst into the vault chamber to find chaos. Guards stood in stunned silence, staring at the massive steel door that had been torn off its hinges as if it were made of parchment. The wards were nothing but scorched symbols on the walls, their magic spent and broken, and inside the vault, on the pedestal where it had rested for 3 generations, there was only empty air where the king's crown should have been. Elder Morrigan pushed through the crowd, her silver hair wild around her face. "It's gone. The crown is gone." "How?" Theron's voice was deadly quiet. "How is this possible?" "The wards were designed to stop Lycantrops," one of the royal mages said nervously. "Whatever did this, it wasn't entirely wolf." Theron stepped into the vault, his boots crunching on fragments of steel and stone. The pedestal was covered in ash, the same gray ash that shot through with silver light when touched. He ran his fingers through it, and even cold and lifeless, he could feel the echo of tremendous power. "Seal the castle," he ordered. "Double the guard on every entrance. Send scouts to search the surrounding forest. I want whoever did this found." "Your Majesty," Elder Morrigan said carefully, "perhaps this is the work of the creature from the reports, the one who's been targeting the outer alphas." "Perhaps?" Theron stared at the empty pedestal, his mind racing. "Or perhaps it's someone we believed was dead." Morrigan's eyes narrowed. "You can't possibly think—" "I don't know what to think anymore." Theron turned to face the assembled crowd. "But I know this. Whoever took the crown declared war on this kingdom tonight. And we will respond, accordingly." As the guards dispersed to carry out his orders, Theron remained in the vault, alone with his thoughts and the growing certainty that the fragile peace he'd built over 7 years was about to shatter. "I'm sorry, Arya," he thought. "I tried to save you, but if you've become what I think you have, I may have to destroy you instead." 2 months earlier, Arya woke to pain. It had been 3 days since she'd placed the Ashen crown on her head, and her body was still adjusting to the transformation. The power that had flooded through her during the bonding was vast and ancient, and her human form struggled to contain it. She lay in the ruins of the Valley of Echoes, her body racked with tremors as the old magic rewrote her very DNA. Her wolf nature, suppressed and diminished for so long by the Omega designation, was finally allowed to express itself fully. But it wasn't becoming alpha. It was becoming something the modern Pax had forgotten existed. Guardian. The Ashen Crown's voice was a constant presence in her mind now, sometimes guiding, sometimes observing, always there. "The pain will pass," it said. "You are being unmade and remade. Your body must learn to hold the power of the first wolves." "How long?" Arya gasped, curling into herself as another wave of agony crashed through her. "As long as it takes. Days. Weeks. There is no rushing the transformation." Arya wanted to scream, but she bit down on her lip until she tasted blood. She'd chosen this. She'd known there would be a price. She just hadn't realized how high it would be. The days blurred together. Sometimes she was aware, able to drink from the stream that ran through the valley, to eat the wild herbs and roots that her mother had taught her to identify. Other times she was lost in visions, reliving memories that weren't her own. She saw the first wolves in their glory, before the schism, beings of pure balance, who could shift between human and wolf forms at will, who drew power from the earth itself rather than from hierarchy and dominance. They'd had no need for Alpha and Omega designations. Every wolf was equal. Every wolf was powerful in their own way. Then came the vision of the schism itself. A group of wolves, hungry for power, discovered that they could bind others to their will using silver and blood magic. They created the first alpha bonds, forcing other wolves into submission, making them weaker so that the alphas could be stronger. The designation of Omega was born not from nature, but from greed. The Guardians arose to oppose them, wolves who refused to participate in the binding, who fought to preserve the old ways. But they were outnumbered, and one by one, they fell. The last Guardian had placed her power into the Ashen Crown and hidden it away, waiting for a time when someone worthy would find it. That someone was supposed to be Arya's mother. Thessa Silvermane had found the crown 30 years ago, had even touched it, had been offered the same choice Arya now faced. But she'd refused. She'd believed she could change the system from within, could convince the Pax to abandon the Alpha-Omega hierarchy through reason and diplomacy. They'd murdered her for even suggesting it. The vision of her mother's death was the worst. Arya lived through it as if she were there, watched Thessa argue with the elders about Omega rights, watched their faces harden with fury, watched them follow her into the forest during a hunt and corner her at the cliff's edge. "You know too much," Elder Morrigan had said, her face cold. "And you're teaching your daughter to question the natural order. That cannot be allowed." Thessa had fought. She'd injured 3 of them before they overwhelmed her. But in the end, they'd pushed her off the cliff, and the official report had called it an accident. Arya woke from the vision screaming. "Now you understand," the crown said softly. "Now you know why I chose you. Your mother was too gentle, too willing to believe in the goodness of others. But you, Arya Silvermane, you have known cruelty. You have felt the bite of their chains. You will not hesitate when the time comes to tear down their false kingdoms. They killed her." Arya's voice was hoarse from screaming. "They murdered my mother, and Theron knew. He had to have known. The young king was 13 when your mother died. He knew nothing, but the elders bound him with silver magic on his coronation day, ensuring he would serve their interests rather than his own heart." Arya's hands clenched into fists. "Then I'll free him. After I make the elders pay for what they've done." "Revenge is a poor master," the crown cautioned. "Justice is what we seek. Freedom for all wolves, not just vengeance for one." "Justice, then." Arya pushed herself to her feet, her legs steadier than they'd been in days. The worst of the transformation was over. She could feel the power settled into her bones now, no longer fighting her body, but flowing through it like a second bloodstream. But the elders will be the first to face it. Over the following weeks, Arya trained herself in her new abilities. The Ashen crown granted her access to the power of the first wolves, enhanced strength and speed far beyond even the strongest alpha, the ability to sense the bonds that connected packs and manipulate them, and most importantly, the power to strip away false designations and reveal a wolf's true nature. She could feel every omega in a 100-mile radius, could sense the artificial bonds that kept them submissive. With concentration, she could even break those bonds, though doing so from a distance left her exhausted for days. She also discovered that she could partially transform, taking on aspects of her wolf form without fully shifting. Her eyes would change, becoming luminous and silver. Her nails would lengthen into claws. Her strength would multiply tenfold. And when she was truly angry, ash would fall from her skin like snow. "You are ready," the crown declared one morning as Arya stood at the edge of the valley, looking out toward the territories below. "The question is, what will you do with this power?" Arya had spent weeks thinking about that question. She could run, take this power and disappear into the wild places, live alone where the packs could never find her. She would be safe, free. But the Omegas suffering under cruel alphas would remain in chains. Her mother's murderers would never face justice. And Theron would remain bound by the Elder's magic, a puppet king who couldn't even control his own fate. "I'm going to break their system," Arya said quietly. "One chain at a time. Then let us begin." Present, Alpha Cornelius of Wolfsbane Pack was known throughout the territories as a brutal leader. He worked his Omegas until they collapsed, beat them for the smallest infractions, and sold the young ones to other packs as servants. He justified it all by claiming he was maintaining pack discipline. Tonight, he was going to learn a new definition of discipline. Arya watched from the shadows as Cornelius staggered out of the tavern in his pack's main settlement, drunk and laughing with his beta wolves. They joked about which Omega they would visit tonight, each suggestion more revolting than the last. Her hands clenched at her sides, and ash began to drift from her fingertips. "Control," the crown reminded her. "Rage is a tool, not a master. Use it. Don't let it use you." Arya took a deep breath, centering herself. Then she stepped out of the shadows. "Alpha Cornelius." Her voice was quiet, but it cut through the night like a blade. The group of wolves spun around, hands going to weapons. In the torchlight from the tavern, Arya knew she must look strange. Dressed in leather and fur she'd made herself, the ashen crown barely visible in her dark hair, her eyes gleaming silver in the darkness. "Who are you?" Cornelius demanded, trying to sound authoritative despite his slurred speech. "This is private pack business. Leave before I have you arrested for trespassing." "I don't think so." Arya took another step forward, and the temperature around her seemed to drop. "I'm here about your Omegas, the ones you've been mistreating." Cornelius laughed, and his companions joined in. "Mistreating? I'm their alpha. I can treat them however I want. That's pack law." "Not anymore." Arya moved. One moment she was 10 feet away, the next she was in front of Cornelius, her hand wrapped around his throat. The beta wolves rushed to help their alpha, but Arya swept them aside with her free hand, sending them crashing into the tavern wall. They didn't get up. Cornelius's eyes bulged as he clawed at her grip. Despite being twice her size, he couldn't break free. Arya lifted him off the ground effortlessly, watching his face turn red. "You've broken pack law," she said, her voice cold as winter. "Not the false laws written by corrupt elders, but the true laws written by the first wolves. You've abused those weaker than you. You've treated living beings as property. You've forgotten that power comes with responsibility." "Who are you?" Cornelius choked out. "I am the Ashen Guardian." Arya's eyes flared brighter, and the crown on her head began to glow. "I am the one who breaks chains, and I am here to deliver judgment." She released his throat but kept him pinned with her power. Then she reached out with her senses, finding the bonds that connected Cornelius to his pack. They were twisted, corrupt things. Chains of dominance and fear rather than loyalty and trust. With a thought, Arya severed them. Cornelius screamed as his alpha power drained away. It wasn't permanent. Bonds could be rebuilt, but for now, he was just a man. Powerless. Vulnerable. Exactly how his omegas felt every day. "Your pack is free of you," Arya said. "They'll choose their own path now. As for you," she leaned closer, her voice dropping to a whisper, "you're going to carry a message for me." "What message?" Cornelius gasped. Arya reached up and pulled a small fragment from the Ashen crown, a sliver of silver-veined ash. She pressed it into his palm, and it burned itself into his skin, leaving a mark that would never fade. "Tell them the Ashen Guardian is coming. Tell them that every alpha who has abused their power will face judgment. Tell them that the old ways are returning, and the chains they've forged will be broken." She released him, and he collapsed to the ground. "And tell King Theron Nightshade that the Omega he exiled is coming home." She turned to walk away, but paused. Without looking back, she added, "You have 3 days to release every Omega in your pack and dissolve your bonds of dominance. If you don't, I'll return. And next time, I won't be merciful." Then she was gone, disappearing into the shadows as if she'd never been there at all. Cornelius lay on the ground, gasping, staring at the mark burned into his palm. It glowed faintly in the darkness, the symbol of the Ashen crown. Behind him, the tavern door burst open, and dozens of wolves poured out to see what the commotion was about. They found their alpha on the ground, powerless, marked by something beyond their understanding. By morning, the story would spread across the territories. The Ashen Guardian had risen. 3 days later, Theron stood in the throne room, reading the latest report with growing dread. Cornelius had done exactly as the Guardian had commanded, released his Omegas, dissolved his dominance bonds, and restructured his pack to function as a cooperative rather than a hierarchy. Several other alphas, fearing they might be next, had begun implementing similar changes. The elders were furious. "This creature is destabilizing everything we've built," Elder Morrigan hissed. "She's turning the natural order on its head. If this continues, the entire pack structure will collapse." "Perhaps that's the point," Theron said quietly. Morrigan's eyes narrowed. "You almost sound like you approve, Your Majesty." "I approve of justice. And from what I've read, every alpha this Guardian has targeted has a documented history of abuse." Theron set down the report. "Perhaps we should be asking ourselves why we've allowed such behavior to continue rather than hunting down the one trying to stop it." "Because it's not her place!" Morrigan slammed her hand on the table. "The Alpha-Omega hierarchy exists for a reason. It brings order, structure. Without it, we'd descend into chaos. Or perhaps we'd discover we never needed it in the first place." The room fell silent. Every elder stared at Theron with varying expressions of shock and anger. "Your Majesty," Elder Aldrich spoke up, his voice carefully measured, "have you been compromised? These views are dangerously similar to those your father warned us about, similar to what Thessa Silvermane preached before her death." Theron's jaw tightened at the mention of Arya's mother. "My father was wrong about many things, as were you, when you told me Thessa's death was an accident." The elders exchanged glances. Morrigan's expression hardened. "That's ancient history, Your Majesty. What matters now is stopping this Guardian before she destroys everything." "No." Theron stood, his full height and alpha presence filling the room. For the first time in 7 years, he pushed back against the silver bindings the elders had placed on him during his coronation. They held, but he felt them strain. "What matters now is finding out the truth. About Thessa's death, about Arya's exile, about all the lies you've told me since I took this throne. You're under oath to serve the council," Morrigan warned. "The silver bonds are breaking." Theron felt something shift inside him, and suddenly he could sense the bindings clearly. Silver threads wrapped around his will, limiting his actions, forcing him to serve the elders' interests. They'd been there so long he'd almost forgotten what it felt like to be free. But now, with the Ashen Guardian tearing down the old structures, the magic that had bound him was weakening. "I don't know who this Guardian is," Theron lied, his golden eyes meeting Morrigan's without flinching. "But I'm done hunting her for you. If she's bringing justice to corrupt alphas, then perhaps she's doing the job I should have been doing all along." He turned and walked toward the door, leaving the stunned council behind him. "Where are you going?" Morgan called after him. "To find the truth." Theron paused at the doorway. "And when the Ashen Guardian comes to Moonridge, because she will come, I'll meet her as an equal, not as your puppet." He left the throne room, his heart pounding. For the first time in 7 years, he'd defied the council openly. It felt terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. As he walked through the castle corridors, Theron pulled out the fragment of crown he'd been carrying in his pocket, the piece found at Cornelius's attack site. It pulsed warmly against his palm, almost like a heartbeat. "I hope I'm doing the right thing, Arya," he whispered to the empty hallway. "Because if I'm wrong about you, this kingdom is about to fall." The fragment flared briefly in response, and Theron could have sworn he heard a voice on the wind. "You were always meant to be more than they made you. It's time to remember who you really are." Meanwhile, in the Shadow Peak Mountains, Arya stood at the edge of a cliff, watching the lights of Moonridge in the distance. The ashen crown pulsed on her head, responding to her determination. Tomorrow, she would descend from the mountains. Tomorrow, she would begin her infiltration of the capital. Tomorrow, she would start the final phase of her plan. But tonight, she allowed herself one moment of doubt. "Am I doing the right thing?" she asked the crown. "There is no right or wrong, only necessary and unnecessary. What you do is necessary. That's not an answer. Then here is one. You fight for freedom, not for power. You break chains rather than forge new ones. As long as that remains true, you walk the right path." Arya nodded slowly. Then she turned away from the city and headed back to her camp, where tomorrow's battle plans waited. She didn't see the lone wolf watching her from the forest below, a scout with golden eyes who'd been tracking her movements for days, who'd seen enough to confirm his suspicions, who now had to decide whether to turn her in or help her tear down the kingdom they'd both once called home. Theron shifted back to human form, his mind racing. Arya was alive. She'd found the crown. She was coming for Moonridge. And against all logic, against all his training, against everything the council had drilled into him for 7 years, he was glad. "Come home, Arya," he whispered to the wind. "Come home and we'll finish what we started. Together." The mountains kept their silence, but somewhere in their peaks, a young woman wearing a crown of ash and silver smiled, as if she'd heard every word. The blood moon rose over Moonridge like a crimson eye, casting everything in shades of red and shadow. It was the most sacred night of the year for Lycantrops, a time when the veil between past and present grew thin, when ancient magic stirred, and when all packs gathered to renew their bonds and honor their ancestors. It was also the perfect night for an infiltration. King Theron stood on the castle balcony, watching the crowds gather in the great courtyard below. Thousands of wolves from every territory had come to participate in the ceremony. Alphas and betas mingled with omegas in a rare display of unity, all of them dressed in ceremonial robes and carrying offerings for the ancestor shrine. But Theron couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. "The perimeter is secure, Your Majesty," Captain Roran reported, stepping onto the balcony. "Triple guards at every entrance. Mages have reinforced the wards. If the Guardian tries to enter, we'll know." "Will we?" Theron's golden eyes scanned the crowd. "She infiltrated the vault without triggering a single ward. What makes you think tonight will be different?" Roran shifted uncomfortably. "The elders have added special protections. Silver dust mixed with salt at every threshold. Ancient detection spells that respond to—" he hesitated, "to those who carry the blood of the first wolves." Theron's head snapped toward him. "What did you say?" "The elders' orders, sire. They believe the Guardian may be descended from the old bloodlines." "The forbidden ones." "There are no forbidden bloodlines," Theron said sharply. "That's superstitious nonsense." But even as he spoke, he remembered the fragment of crown in his pocket, the visions he'd been having since touching it. Visions of wolves who existed before the schism, before alphas and omegas, before the hierarchy that defined everything. Visions of Arya's mother arguing with the elders about returning to the old ways. "Your Majesty?" Roran was watching him with concern. "Nothing. Maintain the watch." Theron turned back toward the interior of the castle. "And keep me informed of any irregularities." As Roran departed, Theron pulled the crown fragment from his pocket. It was glowing faintly in the blood moon's light, pulsing like a heartbeat. She's here, he thought. She's already inside. Arya moved through the crowded courtyard like smoke, her face hidden beneath a deep hood, her presence masked by the sheer number of wolves gathered for the ceremony. The Ashen crown was concealed beneath her cloak, its power dampened to avoid detection, but she could feel it humming softly against her scalp. "Careful," the crown warned. "The elders have laid traps specifically for us." "I know." Arya had sensed the silver dust and detection spells the moment she'd approached the castle. Under normal circumstances, they would have revealed her instantly. But the blood moon's chaotic energy created interference, and Arya had learned to use that to her advantage. She'd also learned something else during her months in the mountains. The Ashen crown could hide her true nature, making her appear as nothing more than a weak omega to those who searched for power signatures. It was how she'd walked right past the guards. The ceremony was beginning. Elder Morrigan stood on the raised platform before the ancestor shrine, her silver hair gleaming like metal in the crimson moonlight. The other elders flanked her, Aldrich, Thaddeus, Silas, and Greta, all of them wearing ceremonial robes covered in ancient symbols that Arya now recognized as binding magic, chains disguised as tradition. "Brothers and sisters of the pack," Morrigan's voice carried across the courtyard, amplified by magic. "We gather under the blood moon to honor those who came before us, to remember the wisdom of our ancestors who established the sacred order, Alpha, Beta, Omega, each with their place, each with their purpose." Arya's jaw clenched. Every word was a lie wrapped in pretty speeches. "Tonight, we also address a threat to this sacred order." Morrigan's eyes swept the crowd. "A creature calling herself the Ashen Guardian has been attacking our territories, spreading chaos and blasphemy. She seeks to destroy the hierarchy that has kept us strong for generations." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Some sounded fearful, others sounded hopeful. "But we will not falter," Morrigan continued. "Our bonds are strong, our traditions are unbreakable, and any who threaten them will face judgment. Now would be a good time to make an entrance," the crown suggested. Arya smiled beneath her hood. "Not yet. Let them finish their performance." King Theron emerged onto the platform, and Arya's breath caught despite herself. He looked different than she remembered. Harder, more tired, with shadows under his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights. But he still moved with that easy confidence, still commanded attention just by existing. Part of her hated him for that. Part of her didn't. "The king will now renew the royal bond," Morrigan announced, gesturing to Theron, "connecting his power to every alpha present, reinforcing the chains of command that keep our society stable." Theron stepped forward to the altar where a silver chalice waited, filled with ceremonial wine mixed with his blood. Every alpha in the crowd would drink from it, renewing their bond to the crown, ensuring their loyalty, ensuring their submission. Arya had seen enough. She pushed back her hood and stepped forward, the crowd parting around her instinctively as power radiated from her presence. The Ashen crown became visible, no longer hidden, and its silver veins blazed with light that cut through the blood moon's red glow. "I don't think so," Arya said, her voice carrying despite not shouting. Every head turned toward her. Gasps and cries of alarm filled the air. Guards rushed forward, but Arya raised one hand, and they froze mid-step, held by invisible force. On the platform, Theron's eyes went wide with recognition. "Arya?" "Hello, Theron." She walked forward calmly, the crowd scrambling to get out of her way. "Miss me?" Elder Morrigan's face twisted with fury. "The Guardian! Guards, seize her!" But the guards couldn't move. Arya had locked them in place with the crown's power, and she wasn't ready to release them yet. She climbed the steps to the platform, her eyes never leaving Theron's face. Up close, she could see the silver threads of binding magic wrapped around him, so subtle that most wouldn't notice. But she saw everything now. "You look terrible," she said softly. 7 years of being the Elder's puppet will do that." "Arya, Theron started, but Elder Morrigan interrupted. "This is the Omega who was rightfully exiled. She has stolen sacred artifacts and attacked our people. She must be executed immediately." Arya turned her silver gaze on Morrigan. and the elder actually took a step back. Rightfully exiled? Is that what you're calling it? Tell me, elder, does the crowd know why I was really cast out? Because you're Omega. Because you're weak. Because I'm descended from the first wolves, Arya said clearly, her voice carrying across the silent courtyard. Because my bloodline threatens your carefully constructed lies. Because my mother discovered the truth about the schism and you murdered her for it. The crowd erupted in shocked whispers. Morrigan's face went pale. That's a lie, the elder shrieked. Your mother died in an accident. My mother was pushed off a cliff by members of this council after she confronted them about the Omega bindings. Arya's eyes blazed brighter. The Ashen crown has shown me everything. I've seen the memories of the first wolves. I know what you did. She turned to address the crowd directly. The Alpha-Omega hierarchy isn't natural. It was created during the schism by wolves who wanted power over others. They used blood magic and silver to bind certain wolves, making them weaker, making them submissive. They called it natural order, but it was slavery. Lies, Morrigan shouted. Guards, stop her! The guards Arya had been holding were released, but they hesitated, unsure. Everything they'd been taught was being challenged in real time. Theron stepped forward, positioning himself between Arya and the guards. Stand down. Your Majesty, she's dangerous, Captain Roran began. I said stand down! Theron's alpha command rang out, and the guards froze. He turned to Arya, his expression pained. Is it true? About your mother? You tell me. Arya's voice was cold. You whispered that exiling me was the only way to save me. What were you saving me from, Theron? What did they threaten you with? Before Theron could answer, Elder Morrigan raised her hands, and the other elders followed suit. Silver light erupted from their palms, binding spells meant to contain Arya. But the Ashen crown flared, and the spells shattered like glass. You can't bind what was never meant to be chained, Arya said, advancing on the elders. The crown is older than your magic, stronger than your silver. It was created by the last guardian to preserve the truth you tried to bury. Then we'll destroy you the old-fashioned way, Morrigan snarled. She transformed, not into a wolf, but into something in between, a combat form rarely seen outside of war. The other elders followed, their bodies shifting into hybrid shapes of fur and claws. Arya smiled. Finally, an honest fight. The battle erupted. Morrigan lunged first, impossibly fast for her age. Claws aimed at Arya's throat, but Arya was faster. She sidestepped, caught Morrigan's wrist, and threw the elder across the platform. Elder Aldrich attacked from behind, but Arya sensed him coming and kicked backward, her boot connecting with his chest hard enough to send him flying into the ancestor shrine. The crowd scattered, screaming. Guards tried to intervene but found themselves outmatched. Arya's power was beyond anything they'd trained for. Elder Thaddeus raised his hands, summoning silver chains from thin air, but Arya shattered them with a gesture. Elder Silas tried to bind her with blood magic, but the Ashen crown absorbed the spell and turned it back on him, forcing him to his knees. You can't win, Arya said, standing in the center of the platform as the elders circled her warily. Your magic is built on stolen power. Mine comes from the source. Then we'll take the crown from you. Morrigan charged again, this time accompanied by all 4 remaining elders at once. Arya let her true power loose. The Ashen crown blazed like a star, and ash began falling from the sky like snow. Her eyes became pure silver light. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of centuries. You will kneel. The elders tried to resist, but the power of the first wolves was absolute. One by one, they collapsed to their knees, held down by invisible force. The crowd watched in stunned silence. Their elders, the most powerful wolves in the kingdom, had been defeated in seconds. Arya stood before them, breathing hard, the crown pulsing on her head. It's over. Your reign of lies ends tonight. Arya, wait. Theron's voice cut through the tension. He stepped forward, and Arya saw silver threads breaking around him, the binding magic finally shattering after years of strain. Before you pass judgment, there's something you need to know. What could you possibly tell me that would change anything? Theron reached into his cloak and pulled out a folded document, yellowed with age. It's your mother's journal. I found it hidden in the royal archives after you were exiled. I've been reading it, trying to understand what really happened." He held it out to her. Arya took it with trembling hands. "Page 47, Theron said quietly. "Read page 47. Arya opened the journal to the marked page. Her mother's handwriting was achingly familiar. "They've threatened Theron. The boy doesn't know it yet, but the elders plan to bind him during his coronation, making him their puppet. I've tried to warn his father, but the king won't listen. He thinks the elders are loyal. I have to act soon. The Ashen crown is calling to me from the mountains, but I'm afraid. Afraid of what will happen to Arya if I take on that power. The elders already suspect our bloodline. If I become guardian, they'll know for certain, and they'll come for her. Perhaps it's better to fight from within, to change the system slowly, carefully, to protect my daughter by appearing weak rather than revealing our strength. But I'm running out of time. The elders grow bolder, and I fear that my hesitation will cost more than just my life." Arya's hands shook as she read the final entry. "Tomorrow I confront the council. If I don't return, Arya must know. She was never Omega. She was born guardian, but I bound her power to protect her. The binding will break on her 18th birthday. When it does, she must find the crown. She must finish what I couldn't start. Tell her I'm sorry I wasn't strong enough. Tell her to be braver than I was. Tell her I love her." Tears streamed down Arya's face. She looked up at Theron, who had his own tears in his eyes. "She bound your power," he said softly, "made you appear Omega to hide you from the elders. And when she died, the binding remained until my 18th birthday," Arya whispered. "The day you exiled me." Theron nodded. "The elders felt your power awakening. They ordered me to execute you immediately. I refused. They showed me the silver binding they'd prepared for my coronation, the magic that would control me for the rest of my life. They said if I didn't get rid of you, they'd activate it and force me to kill you myself." He stepped closer, his voice breaking. "So I exiled you instead. Sent you to the mountains where your mother had been, hoping you'd find what she left behind, hoping the crown would protect you. I had no choice, Arya. I couldn't let them make me murder you." Arya stared at him, seeing the truth in his eyes. The silver threads that had bound him were gone now, shattered by her power and his own will to resist. "You were trying to save me," she said slowly. "All this time, you were protecting me. I'm so sorry." Theron's voice was barely a whisper. "I should have been stronger, should have fought them sooner. Instead, I let them rule through me for 7 years while you suffered alone." Before Arya could respond, Elder Morrigan's voice rang out, filled with venom. "How touching, but it changes nothing. The girl is still a threat. The old bloodlines must be eliminated." Arya turned back to the kneeling elders, her grief hardening into resolve. "You killed my mother. You bound an innocent king. You enslaved entire generations of wolves with your false hierarchy." The Ashen crown blazed brighter. "Your judgment has come. You'll execute us, then?" Morrigan spat. "Prove you're no better than what you claim we are?" "No." Arya's voice was cold. "I'm going to do something far worse. I'm going to strip away your stolen power and let you live as equals among those you've oppressed." She raised her hands, and the crown's power flowed through her. The elders screamed as their alpha bonds shattered, as their accumulated power drained away, as everything they'd built over centuries crumbled to dust. When it was over, they knelt not from compulsion, but from weakness, reduced to the level of ordinary wolves. "Guards," Theron said, his voice steady once more. "Take them to the cells. They'll stand trial for their crimes." As the former elders were led away, Arya turned to address the crowd. Thousands of faces looked back at her, frightened, confused, hopeful. "The old order is broken," she said. "What comes next is up to all of us. No more alphas ruling over omegas. No more hierarchy built on lies. We return to the old way, the way of the first wolves, where every voice matters and every wolf is free." The crowd erupted, some in cheers, some in protest, most in bewildered conversation. Change was coming, wanted or not. Theron stood beside Arya, looking out at the chaos they'd created together. "What happens now?" Arya looked at him, at the boy who'd once promised to stand beside her, who'd been forced to betray her, who'd saved her anyway. "Now," she said quietly, "we rebuild. Together." But as she spoke, she felt something shift. The crown pulsed urgently against her scalp. "Warning," it said. "The elders were not the true source. Someone else pulls the strings. Someone older." Someone! An explosion of silver light erupted from beneath the platform, and Arya and Theron were thrown backward. From the smoke emerged a figure in ancient robes, their face hidden behind a mask carved from silver. "Foolish children," the figure said, their voice like grinding stone. "Did you think the council worked alone? We are merely servants of a far greater power, and that power does not appreciate interference." Arya struggled to her feet, her vision swimming. "Who are you?" The figure laughed. "I am the first chain, the one who created the schism, and I have waited centuries for the Guardian to reveal themselves again." They raised their hands, and silver chains erupted from the ground, wrapping around Arya's arms and legs, burning through her defenses. "Now," the first chain said, reaching for the Ashen crown, "I will finish what I started all those years ago. I will destroy the last Guardian and ensure the hierarchy stands forever." Arya struggled against the chains, but they were stronger than anything she'd faced before. Theron rushed to help her, but more chains wrapped around him, holding him back. The first chain's fingers closed around the Ashen crown, and the world exploded into light. The moment the first chain's fingers touched the Ashen crown, time seemed to fracture. Arya felt herself pulled into a vision, not just a memory, but something deeper. She was standing in the same courtyard, but it was thousands of years ago, under a different sky. The castle didn't exist yet. Only wolves gathered around a great fire, their forms shifting easily between human and beast. These were the first wolves, before the schism. "This is what we lost," the Ashen crown's voice whispered in her mind. "Watch. Remember." A figure stepped forward from the crowd, tall, proud, wearing robes similar to those the first chain wore now. His face was unmasked, handsome but cold. "Brothers and sisters," he said, his voice carrying easily, "we have lived in balance for generations. But balance breeds complacency. Why should we share power equally when some of us are clearly stronger? Why should the weak have the same voice as the mighty?" Murmurs of disagreement rippled through the crowd. An older female wolf stepped forward, and Arya's heart clenched with recognition. She looked exactly like Arya's mother. "Cassian, what you suggest goes against everything the moon goddess taught us," the woman said. "Strength comes in many forms. A wolf who hunts is no more valuable than one who heals. A warrior is no greater than a teacher. We are pack because we are equal." "Equality is a pretty lie, Thessa," Cassian replied, and Arya realized this wasn't her mother, but an ancient ancestor who bore the same name. "I propose a new order. Those with the strongest wolf spirits will lead. The rest will follow. It is the natural way." "It is tyranny!" another wolf shouted. The argument escalated. Cassian's followers began using blood magic, binding those who opposed them. Silver chains materialized from nowhere, wrapping around wolves who tried to resist. The first Omegas were created that night, not born weak, but made weak through stolen magic. The original Thessa fought back. She called upon the earth itself, drawing power from the ancient magic that existed before wolves, before humans, before civilization. She forged that power into a crown, the Ashen crown, and declared herself guardian of the old ways. But she was outnumbered. Cassian's followers overwhelmed her, and in the final battle, she poured her remaining power into the crown and hid it away, ensuring that one day, someone would find it and finish what she'd started. Cassian survived. He became the first chain, dedicating his immortal existence to maintaining the hierarchy he'd created, always working from the shadows, always pulling strings. The vision released Arya, and she gasped, back in the present. The first chain still had his fingers on the crown, trying to pull it from her head, but the crown refused to budge. "You cannot take what chooses its bearer," the crown said through Arya. The first chain snarled behind his silver mask. "Then I will kill you and destroy it." He raised his hand, and a blade of pure silver materialized, aimed at Arya's heart. But before he could strike, Theron broke free of his chains with a roar that shook the courtyard. The young king's eyes blazed gold, not with alpha dominance, but with something older. The binding magic that had controlled him for years was completely gone, and in its absence, his true power emerged. Power that had been suppressed since his coronation. He was descended from the first wolves, too. Theron tackled the first chain away from Arya, and the two crashed into the ancestor shrine. The crowd scattered as the battle intensified, two ancient bloodlines clashing after centuries of manipulation. "Arya!" Captain Roran appeared at her side, helping her to her feet. "Are you hurt?" "I'm fine." Arya broke the silver chains still wrapped around her arms, her power surging. "Get the civilians to safety. This is about to get worse." Roran nodded and began directing the guards. Arya focused on the fight before her. Theron was strong, stronger than she'd ever seen him, but the first chain had centuries of experience. They moved in a blur of claws and silver magic, neither giving ground. "You're fighting for a lost cause, boy," the first chain shouted. "The hierarchy will stand. I have built it too carefully to let children tear it down." "Then you should have built something worth preserving," Theron countered, landing a solid hit that cracked the silver mask. Arya knew what she had to do. The vision had shown her the truth. The first chain was sustained by the very hierarchy he'd created. Every alpha bond, every omega binding, every act of dominance fed power back to him through invisible threads. As long as the system stood, he was nearly invincible. But if the system fell completely— "Theron, hold him!" Arya called out. Theron didn't question. He wrapped his arms around the first chain in a grappling hold, pinning the ancient wolf's arms. "Whatever you're doing, do it fast." Arya closed her eyes and reached out with the crown's power. She could feel every wolf in Moonridge, every bond connecting them, every chain of command. Thousands upon thousands of threads, all leading back to the throne, all ultimately feeding the corrupt foundation Cassian had built. She could see it all, and she could break it all. "This will hurt," the crown warned. "Breaking bonds on this scale. You may not survive it." "I don't care," Arya said aloud. "Freedom is worth dying for." She gathered every ounce of power the crown possessed and unleashed it. The wave of liberation radiated outward from her like an explosion of silver light. Every alpha bond in Moonridge shattered simultaneously. Every omega binding broke. Every hierarchical connection that had chained wolves to each other dissolved into nothing. The first chain screamed as his power source vanished. Without the hierarchy sustaining him, his immortality began to fail. His form started crumbling, turning to ash. "No!" he shrieked. "I built this world. Without me, you'll descend into chaos. You need the order I created." "We never needed chains," Arya said, her voice echoing with the power of the first wolves. "We only needed to remember what we were before you corrupted us." The first chain crumbled completely, his physical form dispersing into silver dust that blew away on the wind. The silver mask clattered to the ground, empty, and then Arya collapsed. She woke to warmth and soft light. For a confused moment, she thought she was back in her childhood room at the castle. But no, this was somewhere different. Unfamiliar tapestries hung on stone walls. The bed beneath her was comfortable but simple. "You're awake." Theron's voice came from beside the bed. He looked exhausted but relieved, his golden eyes bright in the afternoon sunlight streaming through the window. "You've been unconscious for 3 days." 3 days? Arya tried to sit up, but her body protested weakly. "Easy." Theron helped her, propping pillows behind her back. "You nearly died, breaking every bond in the kingdom simultaneously. The healers said it should have killed you. The crown kept you alive, but barely." Arya's hand went to her head. The Ashen crown was still there, but it felt different. Lighter somehow, less urgent. "What happened after I passed out?" Theron sat back in his chair, running a hand through his dark hair. "Chaos at first. Every wolf in Moonridge suddenly found themselves without bonds, without hierarchy. Some panicked. Others celebrated. A few tried to reinstate the old ways immediately. And I stopped them." Theron's voice was firm. "I declared a new law. No wolf can be bound to another without explicit consent. No more alpha commands over unwilling omegas. No more forced hierarchies. We're rebuilding from scratch, creating something based on choice rather than compulsion." Arya studied him carefully. The people are accepting this? Some are. Others will take time. He smiled slightly. Turns out centuries of conditioning don't disappear overnight. But we're making progress. The former Omegas are already organizing, claiming seats on a new council. The Alphas who remain are learning to lead through respect rather than dominance. And the Elders? In prison, awaiting trial. Though without their power, they're just bitter old wolves ranting about the good old days. Theron's expression sobered. Morrigan confessed to everything, trying to blame the first chain. She admitted to your mother's murder, to binding me, to maintaining the system that hurt so many. Arya felt tears prick her eyes. Justice for her mother, after all these years. There's something else, Theron said quietly. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the crown fragment he'd been carrying. This is yours. Part of the crown that broke off during the battle. I thought you might want it back. Arya took the fragment, and the moment she touched it, she felt the crown's presence in her mind shift. Your task is complete, it said gently. The first chain is destroyed. The corrupt hierarchy is broken. You have freed your people. What happens now? Arya asked aloud, knowing Theron would think she was talking to him, but the crown would understand. Now you choose. The crown is yours to keep or release. You can remain guardian, maintaining the new balance. Or you can pass the power on, return to being simply Arya Silvermane. Theron leaned forward. Whatever you're hearing, Arya, know this. The kingdom needs you. Not as guardian, not as Omega, not as anything except yourself. You've already given us freedom. You don't owe us anything more. Arya looked at the crown fragment in her palm, then at Theron's earnest face. For the first time in months, she felt the weight of choice, real choice, not survival instinct or desperate necessity. The crown says I can give up the power, she said slowly. Return to being normal. Is that what you want? Did she? The power had saved her, had let her avenge her mother, had broken the chains. But it was also a burden, a responsibility that would never end. As long as she wore the crown, she would be guardian, protector, warrior, symbol. I don't know, she admitted. What do you want? Theron's laugh was soft and sad. I want you to be happy. Whether that's as guardian or as just Arya, I just want you to finally have the freedom to choose. He stood, moving to the window. 7 years ago, I made a choice for you. I took away your agency to save your life. I won't make that mistake again. Whatever you decide, I'll support it. Arya watched him silhouette against the afternoon light. This king who had been bound, who had broken free, who had fought beside her. This boy who had once promised they'd stand together. If I keep the crown, she said, I'll have to leave sometimes. Travel to other territories. Ensure the new ways are taking root. Be the symbol other wolves need to see. I know. If I give it up, I'll just be me. No power, no destiny. Just a wolf trying to figure out her place. I know that too. Arya took a deep breath. Then she stood, her legs shaky but holding. She walked to where Theron stood and placed the crown fragment in his hand. I choose freedom, she said. For real this time. No destiny, no burden, no ancient duty. Just life. She reached up and removed the ashen crown from her head. The power didn't leave her immediately. Instead, it flowed gently back into the crown, returning to its source. Arya felt herself becoming smaller, quieter, more ordinary, but she also felt lighter, free in a way she'd never been. The crown hovered in the air between them, glowing softly. You choose well, it said, its voice audible to both of them now. The Guardian's power was never meant to be permanent, only to exist when needed most. That time has passed. What will happen to you? Arya asked. I will sleep again, hidden away until another crisis demands awakening. But I do not think that will be soon. You have changed the course of history, Arya Silvermane. The wolves will remember. The crown dissolved into silver light, splitting into 2 streams. One flowed into Arya, one into Theron. Not power, something else. Understanding, connection, the knowledge of what they'd accomplished together. When the light faded, they were just 2 wolves standing in a sunlit room, forever changed, but finally free. So, Theron said after a long moment, what does one do with freedom? Arya smiled, a real smile, unforced and genuine. I have absolutely no idea. I've never had it before. Neither have I. Theron held out his hand. Want to figure it out together? Arya looked at his hand. The same hand that had chained her 7 years ago, that had also saved her, that had fought beside her. So much pain between them, but also so much possibility. She took his hand. Together, but as equals this time. Always equals, Theron agreed. I promise. Epilogue. 6 months later, the new Council of Moonridge held its first official session in the Great Hall, but the room looked nothing like it had under the Elder's rule. The throne had been removed, replaced with a circular table where representatives from every district sat as equals, former alphas, former betas, former omegas, all working together. Arya attended as a representative from the Outer Territories, her voice carrying as much weight as any other. No crown, no special power, just her words and her convictions. Theron sat at the table too, no longer elevated above everyone else. He was king still, but a king who served rather than ruled. The changes weren't easy. Old habits died hard, and there were still those who resisted the new ways. But progress was being made. After the meeting, Arya found Theron on the same balcony where this had all begun months ago. Tired? She asked. Exhausted, he admitted. Governing by consensus takes 3 times as long as just giving orders. But it's better. It's definitely better. He looked at her. Are you staying in the city, or heading back to the mountains? Mountains for a while. I've been teaching young wolves in the Outer Territories how to recognize binding magic, how to resist it if someone tries to bring it back. Important work. Someone has to do it. She paused. But I'll come back. This is still home. Theron smiled. Good. Because I've been thinking, the kingdom needs a new position. Someone to travel the territories. Ensure the reforms are working. Protect those who might still be vulnerable. An ambassador of sorts. Sounds like you're offering me a job. I'm offering you a choice. Take it or don't. But I think you'd be good at it. Arya considered. A role that let her travel, but also keep connected to Moonridge. A way to use her experience without being bound by destiny. Purpose without chains. I'll think about it, she said. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and red. Below them, the city bustled with life. Wolves of all designations moving freely, choosing their own paths. Do you ever regret it? Theron asked quietly. Giving up the crown's power? Every time I'm tired and wish I could just fly to the next territory instead of walking, Arya said with a slight smile. But no, not really. The power was necessary then. Freedom is necessary now. And us? The question was soft, vulnerable. Is there ever going to be an us? Arya turned to face him fully. I don't know yet. We have so much history, Theron. So much pain mixed up with the good memories. It's going to take time. I can wait. I'm not promising anything. I don't need promises. I just need to know there's a possibility. Arya thought about it. Really thought about it. About the boy who had been her friend. The king who had betrayed her. The man who had saved her and fought beside her. About the future they might build together. Or separately. Or something in between. There's possibility, she finally said. That's all I can give right now. Then that's enough. Theron smiled. And it was the same bright smile from their childhood, before everything got complicated. Take your time, Arya Silvermane. We've got the rest of our lives to figure this out. As the last light faded and the stars began to emerge, Arya felt something she'd almost forgotten. Hope. Not the desperate hope of survival, but the quiet hope of possibility. Of tomorrow being different from yesterday. Of choices made freely and futures unwritten. The Ashen crown was gone, sleeping somewhere in the mountains. The first chain was destroyed. The corrupt hierarchy was broken. And Arya was finally, truly, completely free. Whatever came next would be her choice. And that was the greatest power of all.